So my name is Joyce Raimondo. I'm the education coordinator at the Pollock-Krasner House and Study Center. I'm now actually in the barn studio of Pollock and Lee. We're a national landmark in East Hampton, and you can come and visit our site in person, or you can partake in many of our virtual programs. Go to pkhouse.org for more information about the museum. So as part of our Zoom series, we have a wonderful special guest today, Maria Ausherman, who is an author of many art books. And today she is going to focus on her book, which is Masters of Shape: The Lives and Art of American Women Sculptors. So I'd like to introduce Maria and read a brief introduction about her bio. Maria, it's just letting people in. Maria Ausherman has been a high school teacher for 30 years and is author of several books about women in the arts. These include The Photographic Legacy of Frances Benjamin Johnston, currently being used for an upcoming PBS documentary. Congratulations. Behind the Camera: American Women Photographers Who Shaped How We See the World, and Masters of Shape: The Lives and Art of American Women Sculptors, as well as co-author with Patricia Jennings of Georgia O'Keeffe's Hawaii, which transformed into an exhibition at the New York Botanical Gardens, which is amazing. She most recently published Painters in Paradise, exploring the Caribbean islands. She completed her BA from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, her MA from the City University of New York, and her MED from the University of Georgia in Athens, where she obtained a graduate certificate in historic preservation and completed a dissertation for a PhD in art. So after the program, Maria, you'll share tips on how you have so much energy while you're doing all this, and you're a teacher, okay? That is amazing. We're so honored to have you with us today. And so I'm going to turn this over to Maria. And Maria, if you want to say a few words before you do your screen share by way of introduction, that would be great.
Okay, well, I just want to start out by saying thank you, Joyce, for inviting me to speak today. And thank you all for being here for this presentation. And I think I'm just going to go right into the presentation so that afterwards we can talk if you have any questions or comments. And then Joyce can take over and give us a tour. This is the way the book looks. This is the cover. And as you can see, the foreword is by Kristen Visbal, who did Fearless Girl, which is now in front of the New York Stock Exchange. Carol Ward wrote the introduction. She can't be here today. She's very sorry. And my husband, Stephen Taylor, did the photography for most of the pictures, not all of them, but
the one on the front cover.
The one on the front cover. It's an important one. I almost had another one. He said, "Wait, you've got to see this." And this is at St. John the Divine. Okay, and this is by Meredith Bergman, and it's called Memorial to September 11th. And the book features 18 sculptures in chronological order. So you get a sense of what it took for women artists to pursue their dreams aesthetically. And I only scratched the surface. So many sculptors are not included. There's Selma Burke, who did the Franklin Delano Roosevelt portrait. There's Evelyn Longman, who worked beside Daniel Chester French. There's Harriet Frismith, who did the dancer sculpture that you can see when you go inside the Met. And there's so many more sculptors, and many of them are alive and at work today. So I'm going to start with, okay.
Can you push the arrow? It should advance.
Yeah, I'm doing that, but it's not advancing for some reason. Oh boy.
Maybe it just got jammed.
Yeah.
Did you push escape?
Escape, okay. I'll try again. Okay, it's not advancing.
Okay. Right,
Well,
so
and now you're not on screen share, but take
Okay,
it.
screen share. Okay.
I'll show you how to do it.
Okay, go on to So share. Sorry about this.
Okay.
Okay, now press this one.
Well, again, you have to start your slides.
Oh, start the slide from
Uh-huh.
beginning. Maybe that's what happened.
That's what happened.
Okay,
Okay.
start from the
From the
beginning.
beginning.
Okay,
Now
now,
you can advance it.
okay, here we go. Sorry about that. All right, so this is Emma Stebbins. She was born in New York and she grew up in a wealthy household. Her father was president of a bank and her brother Henry was head of the New York Stock Exchange. And until 40 years old, she worked mostly as a painter. And then she left home for Rome, where she turned to sculpture. And she soon became friends with Harriet Hosmer, who you'll see later. And Harriet Hosmer led in an expatriate community and was a mentor to female artists, American artists. And this is what I was going to put on my cover until I changed it, but this is Angel of the Waters. And it's her best known commission, and it was made for the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. Stebbins' brother, Henry, was a member of the Central Park Board of Commissioners, and he helped secure the commission for his sister. And the family helped pay for its bronze casting. It's an 8-foot tall angel, and it's got 4 cherubs underneath representing health, temperance, purity, and peace. And it's a tribute to the Croton Aqueduct, which brings fresh water to New York City. And this was the first public art commission awarded to a woman. And here's another Emma Stebbins sculpture. This is a sculpture of Horace Mann, who's known as the apostle of female education. And he was an educational reformer who believed education should be universal and free, and its aim should be civic virtue and character. And this sculpture was completed in Rome, and it stands today in front of the State House in Boston. We're going to Harriet Hosmer. I'm sorry, I don't have a really great picture of her, but she was born in Watertown, Massachusetts, near the intellectual hub of Boston, Cambridge, Concord, and Salem. And her mother and 3 siblings died of tuberculosis. So her father, who was a physician, encouraged Harriet Hosmer to pursue physical activity. So she did a lot of rowing, swimming, skating, and horseback riding. And he encouraged her artistic talents too. And so she modeled people and animals from a clay pit nearby her home. She was the first woman artist to go to Rome, and most of her work was done there. And she formed what Henry James later described as a strange sisterhood of American lady sculptors. And she really was the best known woman sculptor of her day. And she challenged 19th century expectations of women through her lifestyle and her art. And here is her clasped, it's called the Clasped Hands. And it's a bronze cast of the joined hands of well-known English poets, Robert and Elizabeth Barrett Browning. And it symbolizes their deep devotion for each other. And here is Hosmer's first rendering of the life-size adult made, the adult male form. And it's a playful depiction of a sleeping fawn and inspired by ancient Greek and Roman art. It's a half human, half goat satyr that ties the fawn's tiger skin garment to a tree while he's sleeping against a tree stump. Here we go to Edmonia Lewis. She was born right near where I live in Rensselaer, New York. And her mother was Native American, her father from Haiti. They both died at an early age, so she was raised by her mother's family. She attended Oberlin College, a private co-ed liberal arts college that had been admitting African Americans since 1835. Still, she faced angry racism there, and she was accused of poisoning 2 classmates and attacked by unknown assailants who left her for dead. She recovered, thankfully, and charges against her were eventually dropped. She left school without graduating, and hoping to become an artist, she went to Boston and was taught there how to be a sculptor. She would travel to Rome, the International Center for Sculpture at that time, and she said there were a lot more opportunities there than in the United States. But she was very careful because there was racism there too, but she did all her best to show that her work was her own. This is Hagar. It's one of Lewis's finest works. It's based on the Bible story of Abraham's Egyptian maidservant who bore him his first child, Ishmael. and then was cast out by Abraham's jealous wife, Sarah, to wander in the wilderness. And here you see Hagar looks upward, her hands clasped in prayer. Lewis said she was expressing her sympathy for all suffering women, symbolizing Africa. Hagar, in her despair, represents the plight of African American people during Reconstruction, that very disappointing post-Civil War era, when racism was still rampant. And then here is The Death of Cleopatra, also by Edmonia Lewis. And she's the legendary queen of ancient Egypt. And it's another reminder of the pain caused to African Americans. And it's one of Edmonia Lewis's most famous works. We go now to Anna Hyatt Huntington. She was born in Cambridge, Massachusetts. She was the youngest of 3 children. Her mother was an amateur artist, and her father was a professor of paleontology and zoology at Harvard and MIT. Her parents encouraged her interest in animals, both live and dead, and she spent long hours at the Bronx Zoo, where she completed Reaching Jaguar. And this is one of her first major works, and it's based on her studies of a jaguar named Senor Lopez, who was from Paraguay and was the first feline occupant at the Lion House there. The Bronx version can be seen at the Met, and the stone version you can see here as it's the gateposts of the Bronx Zoo. Now we come to St. Joan of Arc, and this is in New York City. It's her first major equestrian statue made after she moved to Paris, which was at that time the center of the art world. The statue was installed in Riverside Park, where it received worldwide praise, and it's the city's first public monument outside Central Park made by a woman. And it's the city's first monument to honor a real woman. And this commission led to others, and Huntington became one of the highest paid female entrepreneurs in the United States. And she had a long and illustrious career as an artist. Now we come to Elizabeth Catlett. She was born and raised in Washington, D.C. Her parents were children of freed slaves. Her grandmother often shared stories with her about the struggles of slavery. And her father, a math professor at Tuskegee, died shortly before her birth. So her mother, who was a teacher, held down 3 jobs, including that of truant officer, to support Elizabeth and her 2 siblings. And Elizabeth Catlett knew she wanted to be an artist at a young age, and she attended Howard University, where she obtained a Bachelor of Science in Art cum laude, and she obtained the first ever Master of Fine Arts degree at the University of Iowa. She moved to Harlem and became part of the Harlem Renaissance, and she would end up in Mexico City, where she also made prints and promoted social causes. And this is her mother and child, her very first sculpture since becoming a mother herself. And throughout her long and successful career, she often addressed the subject of mother and child. This is the Ralph Ellison Memorial that she made. It's a tribute to famed American novelist Ralph Waldo Ellison, Catlett's only public commission in New York City. And it refers to Ellison's epic novel, Invisible Man, which earned him international fame. There's a quote written nearby the monument that says, "I am invisible, understand simply because people refuse to see me." Here we come to Meredith Bergman. I am very fortunate to have met her, and she took me at her studio. She's living today in Massachusetts. She grew up in Montclair, New Jersey. She's the middle of 3 children. She studied at Wesleyan University, graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts degree from Cooper Union, where she discovered sculpture. And she lives with her husband, Michael, who's a writer and director, and their son. She's a well-known poet and essayist as well. And she explores issues of history, race, human rights, and disabilities, and the power of poetry and music. Here is one of her public monuments on Commonwealth Avenue Mall in Boston, and it includes statues of Phyllis Wheatley, the first African-American poet, First Lady Abigail Adams, and Lucy Stone, the abolitionist and suffragist. And here is the Women Rights Pioneers Monument right in Central Park. It's a 14-foot high sculpture of Sojourner Truth, Susan B. Anthony, and Elizabeth Cady Stanton. And it became Central Park's first statue depicting real women. It was installed in 2020 on the 100th anniversary of the ratification of the 19th Amendment, which granted women the right to vote. And none of these women lived to see the ratification of the 19th Amendment, let alone the Voting Rights Act of 1965, whose work is still incomplete, but it's important to commemorate their work. And here we have Allison Sarr. She was born in Los Angeles, and she's too is living today. Her parents are Betty Sarr, the well-known sculptor, and Richard Sarr, a painter and art conservationist. And she credits her mother for cultivating her fascination with spiritual traditions and mysticism. And being the daughter of two artists, she developed a love of nature and an interest in folk art. And she devotes her attention to the marginalization of both women and minorities. And this is her monument, Swing Low, in New York City, that commemorates famous abolitionist Harriet Tubman, runaway slave and conductor of the Underground Railroad. Tubman was called Moses by hundreds of people, and she helped these people during her 13 trips between the South and North. It's 2 tons and 13 feet tall, made out of bronze and granite. And it shows Tubman striding forward despite the roots that pull in the back of her skirt, representing slavery. And the statue faces south. She's best known for her sojourns north, but Allison Sarr says she's most impressed at how she kept returning to the south, where she risked her own freedom. And I'm going to end with Embodied. This is a bronze depiction of justice, and it's located at the Hall of Justice in downtown LA. And as you can see here, she needs no sword, no blindfold, no scale. She's just weighing and balancing the book of law, which equates to freedom and peace, symbolized by the dove flying from her upheld hand. And I just want to end by saying that I hope you get your own copy of the book to learn more about these 18 sculptors who encouraged one another. They inspired one another. And I really believe this nurturing allowed them to flourish as artists and become successful sculptors. And their work continues to inspire us today. All right, that's it for my presentation. Are there any questions or comments?
Maria, do you want to stop the share screen?
Oh, yeah, okay. Let me see if I can do that. I'm looking.
Just
I'm
push
looking for
the
my
green
arrow.
button.
Oh, here, I lost my arrow here. Stop share. Okay, here we go.
Maria, thank you so much. All of those images were so beautiful and you're so concise. So does anybody have any questions for Maria about her book, about the sculptors themselves? Anyone, you can put the question in the chat or you can feel free to unmute.
Yeah, and if
You know,
oh, go ahead.
I was curious. The women who were sculptors in the 1800s, they were in art school. Were they permitted to have male models? I'm just curious.
Yeah.
I wouldn't think so.
No, and oftentimes they weren't even allowed to be in the same classroom, like Edmonia Lewis, she had to have a tutor by the same teacher who was teaching guys later in the classroom. I mean, and a lot of these women, especially early on, had privilege or lived in a really, Massachusetts, especially around Boston, was a mecca for women artists. That helped a lot too back then.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah.
There's a great book, article rather, by Linda Nochlin, Why Are There No Great Women Artists? And she details some of the educational institutions that women were not allowed to participate in. Any other questions? Well, I have a question about your process, Maria, as an author. how did you go about choosing these particular 18? Why these artists and not the other ones or other artists in general?
Right. Well, Harriet Hosmer was the first one that I learned about, actually, because she was the leader, you know, in the 19th century. And I just read a lot of books, and, you know, they're in my bibliography. And so the ones that I knew the most about through my readings, I latched onto. And whenever I could, I visited these monuments and learned a lot just from being there too. So it was a combination of just reading lots and making visits.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really, really a thrill to meet Meredith Bergman. She was the only sculptor that was living that I could meet in person. And she's just lovely and has such courage and just such great talent. She's very articulate, and she shared, you know, her studio and showed me how she made her work. And it's just amazing how strong you have to be physically to do such, you know, to carry such weight. And it's hard on your hands. And, you know, she's very physically fit, put it that way. You know, she works hard manually.
Yeah, I'm wondering, do you think, in your opinion, that a female sculptor would face even more sexism than a painter because of the physicality of it?
That's a good question. I talking with Meredith, she did share a couple of stories where she felt that there was sexism involved in certain commissions. You mean now or back then?
Just in general.
Well, I do think Harriet Hosmer and her group of expatriates really helped each other a lot. You know, that group just really became well known because they grouped together and they just helped each other out. But those people who just had to do it on their own, I think they just worked really, really hard. And and they were just so inspired, nothing got in their way. They just kept working at it, you know. But I don't know if it would be easier as a painter because of some, you know, you read so much about how painters have had a hard time too.
Certainly, yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'm just wondering if it's even harder for a sculptor because of
Yeah.
the physical.
Well, I guess in a way, because see, when you do sculpture, you're involving more than one person usually. It's very rare that a sculptor starts and finishes all by themselves. You know, usually you have people helping you out with the bronze, you know, and there's different stages. And a lot of times women were accused of not doing their work because of that. And so people like Edmonia Lewis, she would try her very best to do everything herself because she didn't want to have that accusation.
Wow. So we have some questions in the chat. Let's see, I'm just going to go up first so we don't miss anyone. Tell us about the availability of your book. Jan says, is it available in the UK? Specifically, how can we get the book?
Okay. Well, it's available on Amazon, and I have my link here. I have a Linktree account. It's also today, I just got a notice from Oro Editions, which is the publication company in California. And today everything is half price. So if you go to Oro Editions, you can get it half price. And there's a companion to the sculpture book, and that's the photography book. Since I started out in photography, this came right after my book on Johnston, my favorite photographer. So I focused on photographers. And then after that, I thought, you know what, there's not a whole lot written on sculptors. And I know in my own art history training, I didn't study one sculptor, so male or female. So I just thought it was going to be a refreshing change. So that's why, you know, I focused on sculptors after that.
And feel free, Maria, to put any of those links in the chat.
Oh, okay.
You could put those on the end if you want.
Okay, yeah, all right, thank you.
So
But-
let's see. We have a question.
Okay.
Marjorie says, did any of them have muses who served as recurring models and sources of inspiration?
Ah,
Hmm.
yeah. I couldn't exactly tell you who they were, but a lot of times, especially in the 19th century, the women were very attached to other women. And I think that really helped them a lot, yeah. And that would be true for Harriet Hosmer. That would be true for Emma Stebbins, certainly, and others, yeah.
And you mentioned the one sculptor had a child and portrayed mother and children.
Hmm.
Most of the other sculptors, were they unmarried or did they have children?
Hmm.
Oh, early on, in fact, Harriet Hosmer said she was married to her work, and she said, you had to choose. You had to choose whether you wanted children or art. Harriet Hosmer was the most expressive that way. Meredith Bergman, who's alive today, has a very nice family, and she seems to be inspired by them, but I think early on it was women did have to make a choice.
Yeah, with painting too,
Yeah.
the majority of women who are recognized, in the arts did not have children, the majority. Today it's a little different, but historically that was the case. So Nancy says, general question on how the large bronze sculptures are made. Is there a general process that is followed? Other
I wish
materials-
I invited Meredith Bergman to be here today just for that very reason. She could really explain the process well. That's beyond my realm. All I know is that it's very complicated and involves very many people. And also it involves travel, going to different regions. You get the marble from a part of Italy, you get people to work on it in another place, and then it finally gets to its destination. But Penelope Jenks is another person who's alive today. She's in the book. She can explain it real well, and she's written about it in her books. She did the one of Eleanor Roosevelt, that's in Riverside Park. And in her book on Eleanor Roosevelt, she explains very well the process.
Oh, very good. So we have a question about Paula says, the cover sculpture, where is it, by whom, and what is depicted?
Okay,
And-
this one here.
Yeah, that's an
Okay,
amazing sculpture.
this is Memorial to September 11th. And you can see the two jets going right into her hands, and she's using the hands to prevent the jets from going any further. So it's really a picture of female empowerment, and also of, peace. And it's Memorial to September 11th. And it's in a plexiglass cubicle inside St. John the Divine in the Upper West Side. And my husband, Stephen Taylor, found it accidentally, right, Stephen? It was
Yeah.
accidentally?
Yeah,
He's right here.
I'm not sure it's in plexiglass now I think about it.
Okay.
It's just in a very dark space. But I will say one thing, that Meredith was very big about telling me about how she wanted it done. And she wanted she actually wanted the planes in stark resolution. She wanted those highlighted and not the individual. So we had to redo it a little bit to get the. It wasn't important for her for the person to be in focus. She was more interested. I think that just represents everybody, not just one person. But she wanted the planes to be very in stark relief.
The planes going into her hands.
Yeah, so I made sure that I got the shot just the way that she wanted it.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good point. The lighting of a sculpture is going to completely affect the way we see it.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah.
And it's a beautiful photograph as well.
Oh, you know, that's a great point. This was a very difficult photograph. I do a lot of, a lot of event photography. And I will say that, I got a lot of shots of this, but I could present it an entirely different way where it wouldn't look anything like it is here. So, depending on how you produce it or process it, depending upon what the artist wants, that's what's important to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's important to the sculptors too. And, that one sculpture in Boston that belongs to Meredith Bergman, showing Phyllis Wheatley, there were people hovering over Phyllis Wheatley because she's resting on her desk and people were posing like her, I mean, there's something about that image that just made people congregate to her.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
So, Ilwinda says, oh, well, let's go back to Cece says, what was something you learned about your own process because of the work on your book?
My own process as a writer? Is that what you mean?
Want to clarify that question, Cece?
I don't understand the
You
question.
mean the process of as an author?
Yes.
Okay. I learned a lot about the difference between living artists and artists that are not living anymore. My very first book took a long time. I studied a photographer who had died way before I could talk to her, but I was able to meet people who knew her. And that was magical because, if you can get an idea of what the person was really like immediately through meeting, that's so wonderful. But I also enjoy reading and doing research, and the photographer that I was studying was a brilliant writer. And so I just went through microfilms, 23 reels, and just read everything I could about her. And so there's a real advantage to studying people who are no longer alive because they leave things behind that you can study, including their artwork, of course. With sculptors with this book that I did, the Sculptors Who Are Alive, some are very open and wonderful, and others tell you what to do. And so sometimes it's harder because you have to be careful not to step on toes, and you have to get it right, otherwise you feel awful. So I think that's what I learned most, is that there's a lot of difference between working with somebody who's alive and somebody who just left a lot of stuff behind.
Good point. Ilwinda says, is there a standout trailblazer artist who went on to mentor any of the artists?
As a mentor.
I don't know if I heard the question.
They all had mentors of some sort, some like, I'm trying to go through it here. You mean people who helped them be successful in their careers?
Ilwinda, would you clarify the question?
Right. So a lot of people, I'm thinking, all of these artists have great talent. And I was wondering if there was any particular artist that stood out and said, this artist has a great amount of talent, and I'm going to put them in the right direction to get seen, to get reviewed, for their work to be presented or placed at a location where someone could purchase or at least admire, or museums, something like that. Was there anybody that kind of stood out that you know of?
Yeah.
That said, no, I'm gonna.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I think Anna Hyatt Huntington, she was just, like I said, she was the highest paid entrepreneur, and I think a lot of it had to do with the fact that she was married to somebody who was very wealthy. They owned oodles of land, and they started museums, in different places. So she had a lot of influence. I think a lot of times you know, you can be a fantastic artist, but if you don't have any means other than your art, sometimes it's very difficult to get well known. But someone like Anna Hyatt Huntington, you know, she could do what she wanted, really. And right from the start, you know, the fact that her father was working at MIT and Harvard, I mean, you know, I mean, she had a lot of privilege, and same thing with Emma Stebbins, you know, the fact that her brother was with the New York Stock Exchange and her father was a banker, you know, I mean, sometimes it helped to have people in high places too.
Mhm. And
That may even be true today. I'm not sure, but that's a thought. But thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wanda, I think that's a really good question. And if you don't mind, I'll add to that. What I really admire are these institutions that exist that give artists a chance to have an education and to thrive as an artist, even if the person doesn't have money. Okay, such as the Black artist you mentioned, I'm sorry, I don't remember her name, who went to the school, which was one of the first schools to tell us again about that
Oh,
school.
was it Elizabeth Catlett?
Yeah,
She came later. She did the
no,
Ralph Ellison Memorial in New York City.
the artist who you were saying was the subject of racism at the school and was
Yeah,
accused, wrongly
you know,
accused.
yeah, and that was true with Edmonia Lewis, you know, and she went to Oberlin, and it's so ironic, you know, that here was a progressive school, but she had a terrible time there, you know, she barely lived past it, you know. But then she came to Boston, and that's where she really latched on to a lot of support, you know, people who were willing to accept her and help her as an artist. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. And we see this even with Lee Krasner, who I'm going to discuss. She came from very humble means. You know, she was of an immigrant family in the United States, but it really was the education that is often the factor that can lead to success and is a bit of an equalizer. Not 100% by any means. I'm not saying that.
And
But
it helps to have nice classmates and teachers involved in that setting. You know, people who really
absolutely.
root for you. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
true.
the community support. And then also, as you said, Maria, it's the driving ambition and inspiration that despite the sexism, despite the racism, these exceptional people will continue to go on to pursue their passion.
Oh, yeah, that's very true.
Not everybody is able to do that, obviously, or is at that level that a
Right.
human being can achieve that.
Yes. And it depends where you live too, you know. Like I know this, I know some artists who live in New York City, and it's very hard for them because they want to live in the city because it has a lot of advantages for artists, you know, and who you get to know and where you get to exhibit. But the prices, you know, just for rent, or it's just enormous, and it's very hard, especially for sculptors when they have big, you know, works of art. You know, where do you put them? You need space, you know. So money is an issue in spite of all of that.
100. And also, how do you transport them? That's why I try to make art that fits in my car. That make it easy.
Just to oh sorry
Go ahead,
just to
go
follow
ahead.
up, I was an ushering a artist reception at a local theater that I participate in, and it's through the Arts Council. And there was this young African American female artist. I'm sure she's maybe 40, and she went to the Arts Council for the city, and she was explaining that she had so much to give, and she had this. Anyway, they created a grant for her, and they had a reception for her, and all these local other artists there. I think there was a poet that did some poetry, and the city councilwoman for the city came there and said that these are the beginnings of this is our future. You want to keep the arts going, and this is how it gets started. And I know the gathering cost up to 10,000, I think, something like that, because they had a person that was there that would transport the art, just like you guys are saying. So it is a matter of finding and attaching to an organization or a group that, you know, that says, I see something in you, and I'm going to jump on this train. So this was very good. Quite excellent presentation. Quite excellent.
Great.
Thank you, Alwina.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that. And it's really true that, especially with sculpture, like you said, Joyce, if it's really big, you know, that makes it more of an issue. And, you know, where are you going to show it? You know, you need that bond with the community, with the town where it's going to be, or the city where it's going to be. So you have to have a lot of connections, you know.
Yeah, and a lot of skill. So Anja says, from my perspective as an academic artist at university, hang on, it's just, I hope that we will improve art management knowledge for our art students. Anything you want to speak to that at all, Maria?
Oh, for art students. Just that, you know, we do need to fund the arts, you know, and it should be mandatory that art is in school, you know, and I also think art history is really important, you know. I see a lot of art classes, and sometimes I wish there was a little more structure so that part of what they learn is about people that came before them, you know, so that I think that really would be a motivator for a lot of women, especially, you know. Yeah, so I would just add that. I think, I mean, I love art classes and I loved art history, and I just wish everybody could have the same opportunity.
Mhm. And Anja says, thank you very much for your profound talk. Highly enjoyable. I 100% agree. And I'm sure many other people do too. So let's give Maria a Zoom round of applause. Maria, this was so great.
Thank you
And
for having me.
Subject that we haven't touched upon in our Zoom program. So thank you for bringing this new subject, meaning we haven't really discussed that much sculpture in general. So, and the images were just so beautiful and so inspiring. And I hope that this makes everyone want to learn more. And Maria also, as I mentioned, has written other books. So do you have a website, Maria?
Yeah, it's well, it's a very simple one. It's just a Linktree site, just listing the books. It's linktr.ee and then / Maria_Ausherman. So, and if you look, I think I can try to do. I have never made a comment in the chat,
Oh,
but I could.
well, no worries. You just.
Okay, but
And I
it's
think
a
if
link
someone
tree.
Googles you, it'll come right up.
Yeah, if you Google me, the books come up. Yeah,
Yeah, and like
and they're all on Amazon.
and you can easily get these books on Amazon, and maybe even if you go to your local library also, your local library in most cases in New York will purchase the book for you.
Right.
let
The
them
books
know.
are in the New York Public Library, and they're in the libraries near me as well. Yeah.
Well, I thank you so much, Maria, for this enlightening talk, and I hope we get to meet you one day in person if you ever come down to the East End.
Well, thank you. I hope I can be there someday. I'd love to. Are you going to give us a tour now?
Yeah, so I would love to give everybody a tour if you want to stay on of Lee Krasner and Jackson Pollock studio. And I'll focus a little bit on Lee since we are discussing female artists here, okay? But let me step outside a moment because it's a spectacular day in East Hampton, New York. And I will show you at the National Site here how the sun here is incredible. So this is the barn studio of Pollock-Krasner. And I think that it's very easy to imagine why so many artists came to the East End of Long Island, now known as the Hamptons. This is the Springs. It's a part of East Hampton. It's an area known as the Springs. But when Pollock-Krasner settled here in 1945, it was very rural, bohemian, meaning it was very affordable for artists. It was fishermen and farmers. There were only 200 people in the entire town. So I think, Marie, your point is well taken that, you know, nowadays New York City is very expensive. Long Island is very expensive. But in their day, you could have a loft studio, you could buy a house out here, even as an artist. Those days are gone, at least in this area. So this barn studio, which they used as a studio, it was originally over here, and Pollock and his friends moved it here so as to not block this beautiful view of Accabonac Creek. Way back there, there's a body of water that goes all the way out to the end of Long Island. And all that land beyond where there's a little platform here, which was the foundation for the barn, that land was donated by Lee Krasner to the Nature Conservancy. And this property was purchased by Lee and Pollock in 1946 with a loan from Peggy Guggenheim, the art patron. So there we see the farm. I think you could see the farmhouse, right? It was originally an old farmhouse, but we're not going to go in there today. I'm going to focus on the barn studio. Now, this is a good example, as we were saying. Peggy Guggenheim was a patron of the arts. She made it possible for these young, upcoming avant-garde artists to create art by supporting them. And in Pollock's case, she gave him a stipend, a monthly stipend, so he did not have to work at a job or even worry about selling his paintings. And as I said, she lent him money for the down payment. Now, Lee was the manager of Pollock's career. She negotiated with Peggy Guggenheim, right? And so there's the art of making the art, and then there's the business of art. And if you're lucky enough to have someone to manage the business of art and do it really well, you're very fortunate. But anyway, this little building here, this is an outhouse. So when they first moved here, that house was really run down. There wasn't even plumbing in the house. But this area was ideal for artists because the light is incredible. They had all this space. And they could hop on a train and get back to New York City in about 2.5, 3 hours. Okay. And it was affordable. And then what happened was more and more artists during that period settled here, like Willem de Kooning and Elaine de Kooning and many others, and they formed what's called abstract expressionism. This is a groundbreaking way of painting, which put America on the map, New York City, the art capital of the world, okay? So let's go into the barn studio. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna get a pair of these little slippers over here, see? Because I am not allowed to walk in the barn with socks or shoes. So bear with me. Now, while I'm doing this, I'll just tell you a little of the story. Lee always painted when Pollock was alive. She didn't promote her own career as an artist while he was alive, professionally. Here and there, she had some exhibitions, but she really focused on him becoming the main breadwinner, that he would become famous. And she did a great job at it. And I do other tours where I go more in detail about their lives, but we're just going to touch upon some key points here, okay? So I'm putting on my little slippers here. And as I said, you can come in person if you're in the area. Schedule your tour in advance because it's only by appointment and we do get booked up. So now Lee painted in a room upstairs in the house, and then later in the garage while Pollock painted in this barn. And then she took it over after his death. He died in 1956 drinking and driving. And he took the life of Edith Metzger in that car accident. And his mistress, Ruth Kligman, was also in the car, but she survived. So about a year later, Lee resumed her creative output in the barn here. So what you see behind me over here are Lee's art supplies. We see her pigments, we see her mosaic glass pieces up here. You see up there? She made a round, beautiful mosaic table. And I love it. It's a very intimate look here. we have her apron right here, and there's a famous photo of her making one of her collages wearing this apron by Ray Eames. And over here, it's behind glass, so there's probably a glare, but this is Lee's painting cart and her painting shoes. So let's take a look at the barn studio here. So here we see evidence of Pollock's strip painting, which is what he's best known for. And Pollock put the painting on the floor, and he worked from all four sides. He said, similar to the Indian sand painters of the West, who he had seen at the Museum of Modern Art, dripping sand down onto the floor to create a painting and walking all around the painting. So this was radical, this was groundbreaking. Here's the photo by Hans Namath in 1950 of Pollock doing his famous technique. He's not actually touching the canvas. Gravity pulls the paint down. He's an action painter. He's working from all four sides, moving, and wherever he moves, his movement is captured in the final painting. That's why he's called an action painter. Here are the buckets of paint that he used. He didn't use traditional materials. He used house paint, and he used basters to squirt the paint. He used the stirrer as a stick to drip the paint. And sometimes he used the paintbrush, but used it as a stick. Now, that's not to say Pollock was trained traditionally, as was Lee. Pollock studied with Thomas Hart Benton for years, and he studied all of the great artists of the past. And he was very inspired by Picasso, Miro, Orozco, Siqueiros. Okay, that's too large of a subject for this talk, but it's not like he woke up one day and said, I'm just going to drip paint, right? Now, Lee also broke with tradition, and she was also trained in traditional subjects. Both of them went to the Art Students League, and Lee additionally attended Cooper Union. So after Pollock's death, Lee comes into the studio and resumes her creative output. And here we see, this is the cart that I just showed you, right? It's right here in the photo. Now, unlike Pollock, Lee did not paint on the floor. We have what's called her ghost marks up here, you see? So this is where she would have placed her painting. You can see where the spills and splatters went off the edge. Lee is also an action painter. Here she is in the famous photo by Mark Pataki, where we see her actually painting portrait in green. And she's blurred because she's moving. Her paintings are very spontaneous, as are Pollock's, but that doesn't mean they're random. They are masters of improvisation. And Lee says, I let the painting come through. Or no, that was Hilma of Klimt. Wait, she didn't say I let it come through. I'm paraphrasing. She says, I surrender. I don't will the painting. And when it comes through, it's miraculous. So it's this idea that you let the painting, the image flow. Now, if we're going to talk about opposites, in certain ways, the procedure, the methods of these sculptors is very, very different than Pollock and Krasner. Those works are much more traditional. This type of art, it's immediate, it's physical. There's no sketch involved. There's no plan involved. There's no collaboration with a lot of people involved. So it's very, very different. But of course, in both cases, the artist is a vehicle for some higher inspiration, I believe, right? And learns from the past, but makes it their own. It's all about really expression. So here we see the green up there. That's where Lee painted portrait in green. So it's fun when you come in here, you can actually match it up. Now, one day I came in here, I said, how is it that this is Pollock's floor if Lee was in here painting after his death? Where's the evidence of her marks on this floor? Well, it turns out that this floor was covered up, as you can see in this photo here. See how the floor is relatively clean. They had winterized the studio and they covered it with boards. After Pollock and Lee both died, Lee died in the 1984, This became a museum. The conservatives came in here and picked up the whiteboards, rolled back, removed this black paper to reveal underneath Pollock's drip painted floor. And that's why no one else ever painted on this floor except for Pollock. Now, how did it become a museum? Okay. It didn't just become a museum. It was through a lot of effort. Lee decided to bring in Stony Brook University. So that's why if you go to the website today, this is run under the auspices of Stony Brook University. You'll see their logo there. Also, Lee created the Pollock-Krasner Foundation. It's separate from the museum. This is an organization that gives grants to artists. She donated all of her wealth to this foundation, and you can apply for a grant today. Now, one of the motivations that Lee had was that she herself had benefited by government-sponsored programs. Hers is private. The endowment is not government-sponsored. But the idea that the WPA, the Works Progress Administration program, hired artists to make murals. It was a full-time job under Theodore Roosevelt. This program supported the arts. So you could say this is Lee's give back, and also creating this as a study center where young artists, anyone can come here today and be inspired by these great minds, be inspired by history. And we have children as young as 2 years old coming and doing our drip painting workshops, even though technically they're supposed to be over 5. But sometimes we get some 2-year-olds and they're painting along with a 100-year-old, literally. Right? We're all enjoying the technique or just the programs such as this one and learning about art history. So I am a really big fan and a really big believer in we have to really support the arts, right? Whether it be through education programs like this, Maria generously coming, giving her time today. All of this is free, right? It creates a little bit of an open window for people, in my opinion. So I want to thank Maria again, really, for your generosity.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we'll meet one day, Maria.
Yeah, it'd be wonderful. I'd love that.
And thank you, everybody, for all your wonderful comments and for coming today. So we hope you enjoyed the talk. Any closing remarks, Maria?
Well, I'm just hope that I can be there someday. And I am working on women painters for a podcast. And so maybe that can be worked on some more for the public. But it's just at the early stages now, because painting is so wonderful. You get to do things in color, and so it's really refreshing for me to be working on that.
That's amazing. Okay, keep us posted, okay, Maria?
Okay.
Posted about that when you're ready to launch it. I would love to participate.
Great. Thank you.